Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Bible talk for today. And it's Friday, and lovely to see you. And thank you for joining today, whether you're watching on St. Bart's Pen Facebook page, St. Anne's Lower Pen Facebook page, or as from this morning, St. Editha's Tamworth Facebook page. Lovely to see you, and thank you for joining us today. If you're in the latter category, if you're watching from Tamworth, my name is Ben. I'm your new interim minister in charge as from Tuesday, and it's nice to see you. I look forward to meeting you and hope you enjoy our Bible talk today. What we do is every day we're working our way through the New Testament, and at the moment we are about 2/3 of the way through the Gospel of Matthew. We're in back end of chapter 18, so about 2/3 of the way through the 28 chapters of Matthew's Gospel. And what's happened, the context is, Jesus is with his disciples. They haven't yet set off to Jerusalem. He's still towards the back end of what you might call his Galilean ministry, his preaching, teaching phase, and he hasn't set forward for Jerusalem just yet. And they come to the vexed subject of forgiveness. Now, before we get into the Bible text, I want to say this is a huge subject. Absolutely massive. I did a master's level course on forgiveness. What do you mean when you say you forgive somebody? Are there things that can't be forgiven? Can you forgive on behalf of other people? And that's before you get God involved. If you want a really interesting book on the subject, it's a heavy read but an interesting one. This book's called The Sunflower by a guy called Simon Wiesenthal. The subject, it says here, you are a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. A dying Nazi soldier asks you for forgiveness. What would you do? Apparently it's a true story. It's called The Sunflower, and if you're interested, you can buy it or borrow it off me or something. But anyway, that's further reading, you might say. Let's get stuck into our Bible then. So we're in Matthew 18, and I'm starting to read at verse 21. Then Peter came and said to Jesus, Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children, and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, have patience with me, and I'll pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the lord of the slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, pay me what you owe. And the fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, have patience on me, and I will pay you. But he refused, and went through him into prison till he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave, as I had mercy on you? And in his anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he should pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you, if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Right, so Peter comes to Jesus and says, how many times shall I forgive somebody in the church that offends me? 7 times or 7 times? Is that enough? And Peter's obviously, to be fair to Peter, he's been working on his forgiveness. Something's obviously happened, doesn't it? And credit to Peter, he's been working on his forgiveness. And Jesus comes back and says, not 7 times, but 77 times, or there's even thought it might be 7 times 70. Anyway, it's a lot. It's an awful lot. And then he goes on to tell the story about the unforgiving slave who goes to the king, and he owes him 10,000 denarii. And to give you some idea just what a sum that is, 10,000 is the biggest number in New Testament Greek. And denarii was an enormous amount of money. So it's been calculated that in modern money it will come out to about $1 trillion. So we're talking what you might call really silly money. Yeah, but that's what he owes. And yet the master forgives him out of pity. Then another servant comes to him for another sum, which apparently equivalent to, it's not an insignificant sum, it's about 1/3 of a year's salary. Apparently, that's what he pleads for him for. But despite the fact he's been forgiven this unbelievable amount of money, he refuses to forgive his fellow servant this small amount of money. The king hears about it. The king is not best pleased, and the rest, as they say, is history. And the moral of the story to us, I think, is fairly clear. The king is obviously God, and we have been forgiven an enormous amount by God, and therefore we should be forgiving our brothers and sisters. I think that's clearly the moral of the story. You get something similar in Matthew's Gospel. I think it's chapter 6 in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says at the end of the Lord's Prayer, how can you expect God to forgive you your sins if you're not prepared to forgive the sins of your brother and sister? And that's the message. And on one level, it makes sense. But I think, let's have a bit of straight talking for a minute. I think if we're honest with ourselves, that's hard, isn't it? Because I think we need to acknowledge that for some of us, forgiveness can be very difficult and very painful. And this message, while it's true, actually I think it requires a bit of explanation, and I want to give a bit of help this morning as well, because forgiveness is hard. And when we're very hurt, despite the fact God's forgiveness, forgiving other people can still be something of a challenge, you might say. So I want to this morning just give you 4 things really that you might find, my little contribution, that you might help you and I, and I need to hear this as well, in our task of forgiving other people. Firstly, this, to remember, forgiving somebody is not, absolutely not, about saying what is wrong is right and what's right is wrong. Absolutely not. If you forgive somebody, you are not saying that what they did was all right or okay. Not at all. Wrong is wrong and right is right. And to pretend otherwise is frankly dishonest and lies. So forgiving somebody is not the same, absolutely not the same, as saying what's wrong is right. Absolutely. So if you forgive someone, you're not justifying or excusing or explaining what they did. You're forgiving, which is different. That's the first thing. Second thing, however painful forgiveness may be, actually it's good for you. Psychologically, I love my grudges. I've said this before. I can bear a grudge for years. It's like a bit of a family thing. I think we love our grudges really, and we can hold grudges for years. But actually, it's not good. And bearing a grudge psychologically doesn't do us any favours. If you can offload it, it's good. I remember years ago there was a fellow priest. He's now quite a senior bishop actually, and I was absolutely furious with this guy about something. And someone said to me, "Look, you've just got to go and sort this out." So I went to see him and we had a chat and I explained it, and he apologised and I forgave him. And you know something? What was weird was afterwards, for 2 days afterwards, I dug the garden. I had energy that I didn't know I had. I felt like I was, when you take a rucksack off and you feel as though you're bouncing when you walk? I felt like that. So actually, bearing that grudge was getting me down. It wasn't doing me any favours. And bearing a grudge is psychologically not good. And to let it go, so forgiveness, I would say, is actually good for you. The third thing I want to say is you might find it helpful to think of forgiveness as it can be a process. I find that helpful. So you might think about something, you think, I could never forgive that person. And that can change slightly to, I don't think I could ever forgive that person. Can become, actually, I know it's a good idea, but I can't do it at the moment. Can become, actually, I think there might be possibilities, and because it's good for you, I might look into it at some point in the future. When I'm gradually chipping away. And I think I found that helpful, actually, to sometimes think of forgiveness as a process, to think it through in my mind, and gradually, with time, allow it to chip away, especially with things when you've been very, very hurt. Forgiveness can be a process, and I think that's important to remember too. And if you think, I've often found, if I think of forgiving somebody as a process, I find that helpful too. And finally, though, I think, how would you define forgiveness? What actually does it mean when you say you forgive somebody? And it's, again, as I say, it's a massive subject. How can I sum up a master's level course? To me, I think it goes like this. My best definition of forgiveness, for Christian forgiveness, is this. Christian forgiveness, I think, again, this is my definition, and you can create your own, is this. I surrender to God any rights I have to take revenge against that person. I think that's my best definition of forgiveness. I think to forgive somebody is I surrender to God. It's an act of faith, actually, forgiveness is. I surrender to God any rights I have to take revenge against that person. Yeah, basically, I give it to God, and that's what I have to do. So you might find that helpful, and you can put discussions on the comments below if you wish to. But forgiveness. Jesus is quite clear that actually, and he's right, that God forgives us, therefore we should do what we can to forgive other people, and that's the message of the unforgiving servant. But it is difficult, it is painful. But as I said, I've given you 4 things this morning which I think you might find helpful. Firstly, forgiving somebody is not about saying what happened before is right. Absolutely not. Wrong is wrong and right is right. Secondly, forgiving people is actually psychologically good for you. Bearing a grudge doesn't hurt the person concerned, it just hurts ourselves. And actually, if you can somehow release it to God, that's helpful. Thirdly, you might find it helpful to think of forgiveness as some kind of a process, that something happens over time. So cut yourself a bit of slack and let God help you through the process. And finally, think what forgiveness actually means. When in my opinion, my definition of forgiveness is I release to God any rights I have to take revenge against a person. You may have better definitions, it's up to you. Anyway, whatever. Thank you for being with us this morning. Have a lovely weekend and more of these Bible Talks on Monday. God bless you.